And now it is high time for another installment of Breaking Theology News, where I read articles and news concerning theology, prophecy, the Bible, and spirituality in general. The first article I want to read is from Fair Observer, Independence, Diversity, Debate. The name of the article in the Arts and Culture is The Role of Interfaith Harmony in Today's World. So this will be informative for those that are not acquainted with interfaith ministry, which is what this basically is. By Amjad Salim, February 5th, 2019. And it reads, faith is seen as a cause of turmoil and exclusion, yet it can be used as an antidote. In his book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, Israeli historian Yuval Noah Harari laments that traditional religion is the handmaid of modern nationalism. It divides humanity into different camps, he says, and there is not much hope of religious offering solutions to the global problems. This might be a hugely pessimistic attitude to consider, but as the UN's World Interfaith Harmony Week takes place from February 1st to 7th, these sentiments are not in isolation and should be disregarded at one's own peril. Originally conceived in 2010 as a chance for the global community to promote harmony between all people and to establish dialogue amongst different faiths and religions, it has long disappeared from the world's agenda. Only the quote-unquote converted go about celebrating Interfaith Week with platitudes and statements. However, the mere fact that it hardly registers on anyone's radar is testimony to not only the impact that the week has, but to a greater affliction, affecting the faith community worldwide, akin to what Harari alludes to in his writing. Today there is a loss of trust and hope in institutionalized religion, providing some respite to tensions in global politics at a time when there is a need to unite to address international problems. Faith is plagued by local challenges, creating a crisis of values, morals, and ultimately interfaith engagement. A crisis, to say the least. These challenges arise as we are increasingly living in an age of disruption that affects the way we communicate, do business, and how we relate to each other. Thanks in part to globalization, we are now experiencing the disruption of the social fabric that helps individuals define themselves and assess their social roles. In one sense, that doesn't seem to be such a bad thing because we have seen the upending of traditional structures of authority, the relocation of centers of power, and the emergence of a flood of perspectives on how life should be lived. Yet, primarily because of these disruptions that have unanchored lives and challenged traditional structures and networks, we see a backlash of increased racism and xenophobia amidst a wave of nationalism incapable of dealing with globalization. I would add here that the kingdom of God is a global kingdom. More on that later. Continuing, in addition, we see a growing globalization of fragility that is creating new forms of vulnerability for communities, with migration, climate change, and mental health all being seen as top priorities for 2019. The battlefield for tackling vulnerability is not defined by geography. It is in our streets, in our hospitals, in our schools, and in our places of worship. In 2019, vulnerability will be easily defined as the rise of pandemics, along with greater disparities between rich and poor, men and women, rural and urban communities, and even this generation and the next. Our search for social identity has become a paradox, remaining fluid in the midst of the increasing mobility of people, as well as the ease of global communications that make it possible for everyone to live everywhere. As a result, huge new multicultural populations are emerging around the world that have mixed identities shaped by multiple competing factors. The loss of the moral compass from those in charge is compounded by general loss of authority, as it is no longer clear who is in charge. With the loss of authority comes a threat of security, compounded by the challenge on national unity by division based on religious, ethnic, and tribal identities, and new ideologies of nationalism. This is what Hari talks about, and precisely what this week should focus on in terms of creating a space for dialogue around interfaith harmony. Whilst faith is seen as a cause of turmoil and exclusion, it can be used as an antidote. New solutions can be developed to challenge people to create equal opportunities for diverse communities of ethnicities, traditions, cultures, and faiths. As sociologist Ali Shiratari put it, religion is an amazing phenomenon that plays contradictory roles in people's lives. It can destroy or revitalize, put to sleep or awaken, enslave or emancipate, teach docility or teach revolt. Why faith? Why now? In his talk around the future of education as the World Economic Forum in 2018, Chinese billionaire Jack Ma talked about the need to revisit the teaching of values in the face of increasing automation. This is an inherent USP for religious teachings and institutions to make themselves more relevant again. Religious practices and perspectives continue to be sources of values that nourish ethics of multicultural citizenship, commanding both solidarity and equal respect. Historically, spiritual heritage has often provided humanity with the capacity for personal and social transformation. Simply put, for many people around the world, faith is embedded in cultures, practices, traditions, and community values. Thus today, as we experience dark moments, religion can appear to shine like a beacon of hope and reliability. Hence, Interfaith Week should once again discuss this idea that religions provide trusted institutions that have their bases of legitimacy in the divine order of the universe and in the societies they have nourished and been nourished by, as a repository of symbols, a system of belief, a convergence of cultural rites, a structure of morality, an institution of power, and one that challenges old systems. Faith should once again explore how it can offer people a sense of community, a trusted authority, and meaning for their lives. Religious institutions need to become mediums for inclusive engagement as they offer simply and easy access to communities as well as simple language to express the commonalities of existence through the expression of common values. The invoking of social responsibility and working together on issues of social justice and ethics. Thus, rather than just discussing interfaith engagement, we need to speak about action that speaks to a concept of inclusion and around religious identity. One that works on the premise of building an understanding of religious pluralism founded on common features in a language spoken by most people, setting the agenda for creating a new, improved environment, as religion can cut across class, ethnic, geographic, and cultural lines. Religious leaders can serve an important, if sometimes informal, representative function. Members of a religious community have an enormous capacity to increase their cultural, social, and economic links with one another and with other religious and secular partners in other parts of the world. Religious identity can thus serve as a powerful bond amid the vicissitudes of globalization, and one reinforced by ethical commitments embedded within a particular tradition. Working on a diverse shared policy of pluralism means you can tap into a hidden channel for creating engagement between people. This can allow us to find new ways to anchor ourselves in a connected world. In the turbulent waters of the global era, religion, which has its basis in the past, can provide solid ground and protection. World Interfaith Harmony Week offers us an opportunity to do so. We have to address the challenges as the polarization that is tearing apart the fabric of the global community. This will never be easy, but it remains vitally important given the uncertainty we face in 2019. There is a greater need for such spaces to pause and reflect on how to create a new environment for the promotion of interreligious and intercultural dialogue, as well as understanding and cooperation for peace. Everyone's responsibility. Incidents around the world, whether violence in the Middle East, anti-immigrant sentiment in Europe, the rise of racist nationalism in Asia, or xenophobic rhetoric worldwide, emphasize the need to build societies that are shared by everyone. These shared societies are uniquely imagined as places where durable peace is maintained through values of compassion and solidarity, and by engaging and encouraging the promotion of dialogue amongst the different forms available in all cultures. This, of course, is the idealistic aspiration behind World Interfaith Harmony Week, but with a realistic recognition that it requires real work from all stakeholders that constitute society as a whole. In other words, it is not the purview or responsibility of one component, but rather everyone. There needs to be real and fruitful conversations that involve talking to people and understanding how to address the misperceptions that exist about the other, quote unquote, within all of us. We need to have an honest and open discussion about faith and its role in society and what exists within the faiths of mutual coexistence. This centers around common values that espouse the notion of a shared humanity, social responsibility, social justice, and ethics. In essence, we have to rediscover a spirituality of commonality that will allow us to recognize the common space and substance amongst all doctrines, which will provide the fuel for social change and trigger action for the unity of humanity. This shared language will enable us to develop a set of ideals that continue to stir our collective conscience, a common set of values that bind us together despite our differences, and a running thread of hope that makes this improbable experiment of reconciling and rehabilitation of vulnerable communities possible. These values and ideals will have to be living, which cannot find expression on paper or monuments, and not necessarily in words, but action, or in the annals of history books, but which remain alive in the hearts and minds of people, inspiring us to pride, duty, and sacrifice. These living values will have to help us build on shared understandings and should be the glue that binds every healthy society together. Emphasis on the word healthy society. However, whilst dialogue is a beginning, it is important that engagement goes beyond this. Interfaith and increasingly intra-faith dialogue must produce something tangible for communities on the front line. We're now living at a time where increasingly across the world political violence, flavored by faith, culture, and identity, tribal identities, tribal warrior consciousness, is being used to justify positions of power. And so we see a certain degree of power tripping. This seems to be common. This often leads to misconceptions and misperceptions about certain faiths and its followers. Take, for instance, the demonization of other, which is probably common within all religions. This often leads to misconceptions and misperceptions about certain faiths. The tragedy will be if we lose this battle, faith identities will continue to be a part of the picture, and faith will be a strong rallying point for global communities. As people of faith and spirituality, we have to retake the reins and change the paradigm. The views expressed in this article are the author's own and do not necessarily reflect the Fair Observer's editorial policy. So that's an article from the Fair Observer 2019 by Amjad Salim. And now from an article from PsyPost, PSYPOST. Religious people internalize stereotypes about moral superiority and are more responsive to identity threats. By Eric W. Dolan, May 18th, 2019, in Psychology of Religion and Social Psychology, Academia. Research indicates there is extreme moral prejudice against non-religious people around the world, which appears to be rooted in institutions about religion's role in morality. Whether religious people are actually morally superior to their less religious counterparts, however, remains unclear, perhaps by perception only. Does your religion give you a sense of superiority over others? I would rethink it. 2 new studies, which focus on how religion influences a person's perception of his or herself, provides some new insights into the association between religiosity and morality. It is fascinating to understand where people's sense of morality comes from. Why do some people view themselves as more morally good than other people? Said Sarah J. Ward, a postdoctoral research scholar at Columbia Business School and the corresponding author of both studies across the world. Quote, religious people are often viewed as more moral than non-religious people. People who are religious also have a tendency to think of themselves as highly moral compared to people who are not religiously affiliated, such as the nones, atheists, and agnostics, for instance. I wanted to explore whether religious people think they are highly moral because they are essentially stereotyping themselves as members of their religious in-group, which they also view as moral, Ward said. In research published in Psychology of Religion and Spirituality, the researchers conducted 3 surveys of 1,667 participants in total to examine how religiosity influenced moral self-image. Ward and her colleague found evidence that religious people internalized stereotypes regarding the moral superiority of their particular religious group. They also found that religiosity was positively associated with impression management, referring to an individual's efforts to influence other people's perceptions of themselves as, quote unquote, moral. We often view ourselves as sharing characteristics with members of groups to which we belong. Of course, this gives us a sense of belonging. Part of the reason religious people view themselves as highly moral is due simply to being members of a group, that religion, that they view as very moral, in a sense. The morality of one's religious group can, quote unquote, rub off on them, Ward explained to SciPost. The study helps to examine the relationship between religiosity and moral self-image, but many other factors are likely involved. There are several ways that religion may influence people's sense of morality. It is important to understand whether participating in religious services, rituals, or simply praying might make religious feel moral on a daily basis, Ward explained. But this is only when humans compare themselves to others, which, from my memory, the Bible teaches us to not do that. Which is ironic, because people do it every day, Christian or not. Continuing, it is also crucial to examine religion's influence on morality within varied religious affiliations, which I was unfortunately not able to do in the present studies. In a related study of 992 participants, which was published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, Ward found that religious people were more responsive when their moral self-image was threatened. Whether this threat is perceived or imagined, compared to less religious people, more religious people tended to donate more money to charity after being asked to write about a time when they acted immorally. In other words, religious people were more likely to try to compensate for a past transgression. You might call that the working out of karma. But among participants in the control condition who wrote about the path they took the last time they went to the grocery store, religiosity was unrelated to subsequent donations to charity. The pattern of results suggests that religious motivations toward life and belief in God do not promote moral behavior in a straightforward way. Although there is a link, it's not as vast as you might think. For non-religious people can also be highly moral in character. Another reason perhaps why the quote-unquote moral argument for the existence of God tends to fall short. Not that that is not a good argument, because it is. It's just not the only one. Indeed, the highly contextualized nature of religious pro-sociality suggests that the motivations underlying religious people's sense of morality may be more in service of egotistic concerns, or egoistic rather, which is basically the same. People may pursue moral identity or religion for self-enhancing motivations, such as feeling that one is morally superior to others, or displaying one's pro-sociality publicly in hopes of social acclaim. The studies Moral Stereotypes, Moral Self-Image and Religiosity, and Moral Self-Regulation, Moral Identity and Religiosity were authored by Sarah J. Ward and Laura A. King. Moving on to the next article, entitled, "The Christ is Bigger Than Christianity," from the Center for Action and Contemplation. An excellent website, I might add. From a Sunday, March 26 article, 2017. The Christ is bigger than Christianity. And in everything that I saw, I could perceive nothing except the presence of the power of God, and in a manner totally indescribable. And my soul, in an access of wonder, cried out, "The world is pregnant with God." Angela Foligno, 1248 to 1309. Just as the Trinity is foundational to understanding the loving, inclusive, and participatory nature of God, a proper notion of the cosmic Christ brings the mystery even closer to home. The health and survival of our planet and all its inhabitants may depend upon recognizing the inherent sacredness of all materiality. The God many Christians worship is far too small. Classical theism. God is not and never has been a tribal God. It's humans that are tribal. Somewhere out there, belonging only to Judaism or Christianity or Islam for that matter. It's no wonder so many educated postmodern people have given up on such a God. This God is not nearly as big as science is discovering the universe itself to be. How could the Creator be smaller than the creation and less loving than most creatures? The mystery of Christ is much bigger than Christianity. And if we don't make that clear, we're going to have a little ability to make friends, build bridges, understand, or respect anybody other than ourselves. And finally, not even understand ourselves. Jesus did not come to create an elite country club with an arbitrary list of rules, regulations, requirements for who's in and who's out. Jesus came to reveal something that has always been true everywhere, for everyone, and for all time. Otherwise, it is not, quote unquote, true. It seems to me that we've had more Jesusology than Christology. The first 2,000 years of Christianity have largely dealt with Jesus, and even that not very well, because we do not recognize his corporate personality, which Cynthia Burgo and I try to explain over these next 4 weeks. Jesus came to reveal the larger mystery of the Christ. Paul demonstrated that Jesus was the Christ, Acts 9:22. For Paul, that was the exact implication of the new risen presence that he perceived in creation itself. Romans 8:19-23. In humans, 1 Corinthians 12:12 and 13. And even in elements symbolized by bread and wine, 1 Corinthians 11:23-26. The resurrection of Jesus was the symbolic way of saying his presence was beyond any limits of physical space and time. Jesus was historically bound. The Christ is omnipresent. Franciscan philosopher and theologian John Duns Scotus, 1265-1308, taught that Christ was the very first idea in the mind of God. In other words, God wanted to manifest the God self externally, so an eternal love affair could begin between matter and God, who is spirit. This divine love affair, eventually called the Christ, has been unfolding and manifesting for about 14 billion years now. Jesus came as its personification a mere 2,000 years ago, I guess, when human consciousness was mature enough for a face-to-face encounter, but apparently not. But according to God's plan, the Christ was crucified. Were they prepared for that face-to-face encounter? No, they killed it. Well, attempted to, but he is risen. Gateway to silence, in the beginning and the end. Adopted from Richard Rohr, Christ, Cosmology, and Consciousness, a reframing of how we see. And I'll leave the link. There's an MP3 download and the Cosmic Christ Disc 2. Also, there's an MP3 download. So there's that article, and on to the next. From Christ Harbor, this entitled, by author Terry Cook, October 19th, 2024, so it's fairly recent. The Antichrist is not a person. Misconceptions. Many believe today that Antichrist, or the Antichrist, will be a person whom Satan himself will possess before the end of the world. Little comment. Basically, they derive this from a fictional work known as Left Behind. According to the premillennial dispensationalist scheme of eschatology, which I believe, in my opinion, is false. Continuing, they believe that he will become a dictator who will come to power during a 7-year period called the Great Tribulation, after the church has been, quote unquote, raptured from the earth. And of course, this storyline is well thought out within the fictional work of Left Behind, Theology. And basically reading the Bible completely in a literalistic, futurist fashion, while ignoring all the other methods of hermeneutic and comparative theologies. But is that what the Bible actually says? In this article, I want to explore how this idea became so popular today, and also to offer my readers a different perspective. How Antichrist is used in the Bible. The word itself only appears 4 times, and only in the epistles of John, although it could be said that it's implied elsewhere, such as Revelation and Daniel. Who identifies Antichrist as a spirit that has gone into the world to deny the Christ, within and without. 1 John 2:18 and 19 KJV reads, "Little children, it is the last time, and as you have heard, the Antichrist shall come. Even now, when this was penned, are there many Antichrists, whereby we know that it is the last time. They went out from us, but they were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would no doubt have continued with us, but they went out, that they might be made manifest that they were not all of us." So keeping this in context is probably paramount to understanding the biblical notion of Antichrist, without coloring too far outside of the biblical lines of understanding, which is what I think the artistic license was given during the making of the Left Behind films and books, which promote this idea of a dictator rising to rule the world. 1 John 2:22, "Who is a liar but he that denies that Jesus is the Christ?" He is Antichrist. So it's anyone, basically, that lies and denies the Christ, within or without. He is Antichrist that denies Father and the Son. 1 John 4:2 and 3 KJV, "Hereby you know the Spirit of God, every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is of God. And every spirit that confesses not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is not of God. And this is that spirit of Antichrist, whereof you have heard that it should come, and even now already is in the world." So that eliminates a strict futurist idea right there. How could they not see this? 2 John 1:7, For many deceivers are entered into the world, who confess not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh, in their flesh, or any flesh. This is a deceiver and an antichrist. So the flesh, that beast-like nature within man that refuses to accept God's plan of salvation. They deny the Father and the Son. They deny that Christ has come in their flesh, or anyone's for that matter. In fact, to some, Jesus never existed. It's a lie. Amazing. Amazing unbelief. According to these verses, the Antichrist is a spirit that is in the world to convince people to deny that Jesus is, was, and will be actually God, and that he had come into the world as a human being. And not just the historical Jesus, but remember, Christ is bigger. It's something that has always been. But how has this changed from an antichrist spirit that is already in the world, causing people to deny Christ, to a future person coming to rule the world who is not here yet? But they warn, beware, the antichrist is coming, just not yet. To believe such a thing completely changes our expectations of the quote-unquote last days. As we will see, confusion about this is having a massive effect on the Church of Jesus Christ, the visible church. Origins of the belief that Antichrist is a person. Most people are unfamiliar with how the biblical concept of Antichrist has developed historically, and the forces that began to influence it during great persecution of the early church. Roman emperors looked upon Christianity as a threat to their authority because they claimed allegiance to Jesus as their king, even though Constantine had also persecuted them in order to unify his kingdom against external threats. He officially ended his persecution and legalized Christianity, as well as other religions, in the 4th century by the Edict of Milan in 313 AD. Christianity actually became the official state religion in 380 AD by the Edict of Thessalonica. Perhaps with this was the initial emergence or the forming of the beast system of Revelation. Continuing, by the time Christianity was legalized or brought under law, most of the leadership of the early church had either been imprisoned, exiled, or killed, martyred. They had suffered immense persecution for several hundred years. Like Paul, their predecessor, notable church fathers wrote to instruct the church during these persecutions, but it was the Roman emperors who authorized their suffering. They began to change from John's concept of Antichrist as a spirit to the possibility that Antichrist may actually be a human person. They began to identify some of the emperors as the Antichrist. And of course, this little pin the tail on the human Antichrist continues to this day, with a lot of finger pointing. And one such instance is Donald Trump is the Antichrist. which of course is inaccurate in my assessment, in their zeal to point out their imagined villain, they will go to great lengths to accuse their fellow humans of being the Antichrist. Okay. Notable church fathers. If my readers are unfamiliar with this information, you will be very surprised to learn about the source of our modern beliefs about it. Though I have documentation from other sources, I found a useful presentation of it from another Substack author, probably Alexandra. Polycarp was a disciple of John and used the term Antichrist exactly as John did. He did not identify Antichrist as a single person, but rather that it was a spirit in the world that was on display through people and circumstances that reflected the character of the Antichrist spirit. And of course, that spirit is even now more so in the world, influencing people. He was the only early church father who used the word to mean exactly what the scriptures said it meant. The others after him, Irenaeus, Tertullian, Hippolytus, took more liberty with the scriptures by adding their ideas and opinions. Irenaeus was one of Polycarp's students and wrote extensively about Gnostic heresies, so-called, infiltrating the new church. He is the first one who equated Antichrist with a single human and tried to assign a person's name to the number 666. He wrote the book Against Heresies. Moreover, another danger by no means trifling shall overtake those who falsely presume that they know the name of Antichrist. For if these men assume one number when this Antichrist shall come having another, they will be easily led away by him, as supposing him not to be the expected one who must be guarded against. Tertullian, 155 AD to 255 AD. Tertullian was the next church father to continue the error by capitalizing the word Antichrist in his notable word or work, Apologeticus, where he refers to the man of lawlessness as a single person, thus turning the concept into a human. Note that even though Antichrist is not capitalized in John 2:22, in most modern translations of the Bible, the King James Version does not include the article the in front of it at all, while the rest do. This is an added idea inserted into the scripture, into later translations. The article the Hippolytus, 170 AD to 235 AD. After Tertullian, Hippolytus identified the second beast of Revelation 13 in his writings as a human Antichrist. From there, the concept of Antichrist as a person began to grow. In a sense, it is. It's a spirit, and in one sense, it's not. I believe that this Antichrist spirit can inhabit any human, as Satan influences the entire world and gets them to worship the beast. It could be anyone, not just one dude. Something happened in the 16th century. Thus, the idea that Antichrist as a person began to dominate in the 1500s. This goes pretty far back. It began when the Catholic Church was losing power due to the Protestant Reformation of 1517. The Reformation leaders like Luther, Wycliffe, and Tyndale, and even the Muslims and Jews, believed that the Catholic Church and the papacy was the Antichrist system. Perhaps partially, not as far as Satan can influence any particular religious system. Because of their centuries-long inquisitions that killed hundreds of thousands of people that it believed to be quote-unquote heretics. So they justified their murder by proclaiming it's Antichrist. The papacy began fighting back. The Order of the Jesuits began in 1540, led by a Spanish knight named Loyola. The Pope commissioned the Jesuits to develop a new interpretation of Scripture that would counteract the Protestants' claims that the Roman Catholic Church fulfilled the Bible's prophecies of an Antichrist. They were given the specific assignment of bringing Protestantism back to the Mother Church. This was to be done not only through the Inquisition and through torture, but also through theology and deception. They were told to develop authoritative teaching that would move the blame off the papacy. During the Council of Trent in 1554, they began countering the accusation. Who they recruited? Francisco Ribera, 1537 to 1591. They recruited Ribera, a Jesuit, to infiltrate Protestantism and to spread dispensationalism, placing the Antichrist in the future, thus taking the blame off the present and the papacy. In 1590, Ribera published a 500-page Latin commentary on the Book of Revelation. His commentary was never translated into any other language and was for the eyes of the Catholic hierarchy only. Ribera said that all of Revelation was in the future, and that since the papacy was timeless, it couldn't be the Antichrist, since the Antichrist had to be a single, identifiable human being who would come during the so-called 7-year literal tribulation at the end of time. He also claimed that the destroyer would be a Jew and appear in Jerusalem. He would rebuild Jerusalem, be worshipped by the Jews, abolish Christianity, and persecute Christians. Then he would take over the world until Jesus returns. Cardinal Bellarmine, this Jesuit cardinal, added to Ribera's teaching, stating that the Antichrist would be an evil man who would reign for 7 years at the end of time in the distant future. Of course, this being false, this future, so-called, will never, or would never, transpire. And so when it doesn't transpire, there's your proof that what this is saying is in fact true. They have it wrong. Louis Alcazar, 1554 to 1630. They also recruited Alcazar, a Jesuit, to also infiltrate Protestantism and spread the belief that all or most of Revelation was fulfilled in 70 AD. Unlike dispensationalism, preterism placed Antichrist in the past, thus also taking the blame off the present and the papacy. Manuel Lacunza, 1731 to 1801. In the early 1700s, another Spanish Jesuit, Manuel de Lacunza, compared his own views on the identity of the Antichrist with Ribera's views and wrote the controversial book, The Coming of the Messiah in Majesty and Glory, under the pseudonym of a converted Jewish rabbi, Ben Ezra. The Migration into the Ecumenical World. Edward R. Irving, 1792 to 1834. LeCunza's book was a big influence on Scottish minister Edward Irving. He translated his book from Spanish to English and published it in 1827. Irving called Ben Ezra Emmanuel LeCunza, his worthy master, a free Masonic term, in the preface of the book. He was fascinated with the new idea of the Antichrist. Irving was charismatic and drew large crowds to his Caledonian Chapel in London. Margaret MacDonald, 1815 to 1840. A young Scottish girl, Margaret MacDonald, an acquaintance of Edward Irving, had a vision and shared it with him in 1830. Irving quickly influenced her to believe that this was a vision of a secret rapture that would occur before the second coming of Christ. Unlike the left behind teaching of today, however, MacDonald's vision went on to speak of great testing to befall the church rather than an escape or a disappearance or vaporizing into the sky, out of sight from the Great Tribulation. The migration began to take hold. Henry Drummond, 1851 to 1837. LeCunza's ideas, spread through Irving, would not have become the most popular theory without the aid of a wealthy banker named Henry Drummond. He is listed as a fellow in the Royal Society of Freemasons. He was a political and member of the Catholic Apostolic Church. After his education at Harrow and Oxford, he joined the family bank. Following travels in Europe in 1819, Drummond co-founded the Continental Society to provide Protestant teaching in Catholic countries. He purchased an estate, Albury Park and Survey, where he in 1826 he set up the first of 5 annual conferences to study unfulfilled biblical prophecies. He became a central figure in the Catholic Apostolic Church, part of the ecumenical prayer movement of that period. It was Drummond who financed and organized an Albury conference for Irving, who admits that he preached the doctrine of dispensationalism from LeCunza's book at the conference. John Nelson Darby, 1800 to 1882. His middle name is from a family friend, British Navy hero Lord Nelson. He was a theosophist who became both a lawyer and a priest in the Anglican Church in 1825. In 1830, he published his 7 Dispensations work and included the idea of a secret rapture. In 1878 to 1880, he and his followers split off from Plymouth Brethren Church. He was an Irish aristocrat who adopted Irving's dispensationalist, originally Jesuit teachings, and preached them extensively. Thanks to Drummond's funding of the prophecy conferences in Albury, Darby heard Irving preach at the conference and would go on to be known as the father of dispensationalism. According to his own words, Darby saw himself as a student of the mysteries. He used occult language throughout his doctrinal writings and letters. Many of the phrases are found in Kabbalistic theosophical literature. He didn't learn these esoteric terms from the Bible, but nonetheless integrated them into his theological treatises and letters. His doctrinal writings often use theosophical terms like divine architect, divine intelligence, or the coming one. He believed in what is known as Ireland's most haunted castle, complete with many bizarre stories of skeletons inside walls and sightings of an elemental creature, demon. Darby simply popularized Catholic Jesuit eschatology. His ideas were further promoted and accepted in the United States in the early 20th century when Cyrus Scofield published his Scofield Reference Bible. Cyrus Schofield, 1843 to 1921. Schofield was a scandal-ridden ex-lawyer who became an American theologian, minister, and writer whose best-selling annotated Bible popularized futurism and dispensationalism among fundamentalist Christians. Funded by Zionist Samuel Utenmeyer, Samuel was a Zionist who found Schofield through a network of contacts like Mordecai Kaplan and Lewis Marshall in the Jewish Theological Seminary, which he helped build and support financially. He was given the job of injecting political Zionist beliefs into Christianity, thus creating Christian Zionism. To do this, he knew he had to find someone who could be used as a spokesman for the movement. He found his mark in Schofield. He began by introducing Schofield to the ideology of Zionism and to socialist world leaders. Even with Schofield's shady past, a criminal record, and the fact that he had never been to seminary, the Zionists were able to control the press, do some public relations work, and along with their international network, he became one of America's leading theologians, despite his dubious, unqualified nature. It was largely through the influence of Schofield's notes that dispensational premillennialism became influential among fundamentalist Christians in the United States, and these notes became a significant source for popular religious writers such as Hal Lindsey. Through those notes, the masses were introduced to the ideas like the secret rapture of the church and the rebuilding of a third temple in Jerusalem. According to Joseph Canfield, who wrote the biography, The Incredible Schofield, and his book, Schofield's Theology was most helpful in getting fundamentalist Christians to back Untermeyer's project of promoting international interest in the Zionist movement. The Schofield Bible was published by Oxford University Press in London, which is owned by Freemasons. Schofield's Reference Bible introduced many to Christian Zionism who believed that the return of the Jews to the state of Israel in 1948 was in accordance with Bible prophecy. One of the Jesuit ideas Schofield popularized is that Daniel 9:27 refers to the Antichrist. Before Schofield, most theologians believed that he, in that verse, was Jesus. But according to Schofield, he is in Daniel 9:27 referring to just the opposite, Antichrist. The occult inverts the truth, and the Jesuits and Freemasons who created the theory of dispensationalism have always seen Jesus as the Antichrist because they see themselves as God. And the plot is deep. The reason for the popularity. The Jesuits in the Catholic Church created a lie that went viral with the help of Freemasons and is believed by many today. They are responsible for eventually infiltrating Christian institutions and for distributing it throughout the world. Criticism is not directed at the masses inside those institutions, but at the occultists like Samuel Utenmeyer and John D. Rockefeller, who used them over the last century as a smokescreen to instruct the instructors with their sorcery. John D. Rockefeller Sr. claimed to be a Baptist and was a master at establishing monopolies, both in business and in institutions. As a Freemason, he was a major financial contributor in founding our modern educational school system and medical schools and monopolizing what was taught through them. He also had a major influence in establishing seminaries. He and an unnamed donor gave over $2 million to establish Union Theological Seminary. He funded $1 million to the University of Chicago Divinity School in 1892, and the Rockefeller Brothers Fund gave $65,000 to Union Theological Seminary in the city of New York in 1924. Also, thanks to Rockefeller Jr., two schools merged to become Colgate Rochester Divinity School. In 1928, he later established the Salantic Fund to support theological education, and this was a major source of financial support until 1959. From these seminaries come some of the teachings passed throughout churches via the occultists' influences, Jesuits, Zionists, Freemasons, etc., and believed as doctrine. This may explain how the allegorical man of sin became literal or could infiltrate the imagination of modern-day Christianity and render it powerless in the last days. 2 Thessalonians 2, 3, and 4. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he as God sits in the temple of God, not talking about a building, but the people, rather, showing himself that he is God. Who is teaching those who claim to teach the Bible today? In America, the Moody Bible Institute, Biola University, and Dallas Theological Seminary played important roles in spreading the concept that the Antichrist is a person in a belief called dispensationalism, which by then took hold and became quite popular, even to this day. Not to suggest that they were not sincere in what they believed or that they knowingly led people astray, but many alumni from these institutions wrote best-selling books that gave most Christians their understanding of the end times. Very convincing books. Louis Sperry Schaeffer, 1871 to 1952, was mentored by C.I. Scofield and was founder of Dallas Theological Seminary, which is considered by many as the headquarters of dispensational theology. Many Dallas Seminary alumni have been some of the most influential evangelical leaders of the last 50 years. They include names like Charles Swindoll, G.K. Beale, J. Vernon McGee, Kenneth Taylor, Ray Stedman, J. Dwight Pentecost, Hal Lindsey, Harold Hollner, and Robert Jeffries, one of the spiritual advisors to Donald Trump. One of the more influential alumni today is Dr. David Jeremiah, who replaced Tim LaHaye, one of the authors of the Left Behind series, as pastor of Shadow Mountain Community Church. An identical symbol used by Freemasons inside their Templar building was used by LaHaye on the cover of his 1998 book, The Power of the Cross. Not to suggest that he agrees with it, but the all-seeing eye and an inverted cross can also be seen in the stained glass behind the pulpit where LaHaye and now Jeremiah preaches every week. Adrian Rogers, Charles Stanley, W.A. Criswell were among the more prominent Southern Baptist dispensationalists before the 19th century, no one in the Southern Baptist movement held to their dispensational views. Influential churches in America today. One form of these beliefs or another is now preached by major influential churches in America and has become a mainstream Christian belief. Therein is the root and crux of the problem. One of the more prominent is the Calvary Chapel movement that began in the late 60s. It is taught in the seminaries as if it is true. It is then taught to the masses, and the cycle continues. Lies are passed on generationally. Traditions ensure each generation gets the same indoctrination as the previous ones. Its roots started in the Catholic Church as a means to lie about the scriptures, and now a majority of Christians, Protestants included, believe that the Antichrist is a person instead of a spirit, and that he is a person of the future, dispensationalists, or that he is a person of the past, preterists. Of course, this evades the present. These lies started out as a means to protect the Pope and the Catholic Church, but now that they are having a neutralizing effect on a majority of the Church today, both Catholic and Protestant. An experience I had during Bible college illustrates how, quote, I had a part-time job working in maintenance for the college I was attending, and one day I was asked to do something that I thought could best be done by someone else at another time. In response, the supervisor asked me a few questions. He asked, if not you, then who? If not now, then when? If not here, then where? His point was inescapable. If it was not about me or about here or about now, then the job would never get done. So I proceeded on to do the assignment. The church today is in the same place as I was then. If it is about the nation of Israel, then it is not about me. If the Antichrist is a person of the future, then it is not about now. If the church will be caught away before the tribulation begins, then it is not about here. If Satan wanted to ensure that the church would offer little resistance to his last days attempt at ruling the world or a one world government, he could not have chosen a better strategy. If a person truly believes that it's not about me, it's not about here, it's not about now, that completely removes him or her in their thinking from any real consideration about what they should be doing in the last days. We simply won't be here. Conclusion. Through their influence and money, the occultists have used their agents to distribute designer facts about the end times through key publishing houses, crafty marketing strategies, and their ministries to speak to the world. Together, they have created a simulated reality that isn't anywhere near what is actually happening. In other words, they measure Antichrist activities in the here and now. They have wrapped the truth about the last days in deception that is designed to placate the church and completely neutralize resistance from them to their global plans. Satan is working through the mind. One commentator put it this way: the media, governments, elite bankers, money changers, buyers and sellers, and influential people have all created a system that runs on wealth, sexual immorality, and the targeted destruction of God in the minds of people. Is Antichrist a person or a spirit? Collectively, I would say both. And the beast is within human nature itself. A person or a person with the Antichrist spirit, what's the difference? The difference is whether you believe that the Antichrist is a person who is not here yet, but is still in the future, and that whatever is happening on earth right now is relevant to you because you will be gone before this tribulation begins. How convenient. The difference is whether you know that Satan is attempting to take his place in the temple of God. You are God's temple by convincing you that it is not about you, not about here, and not about now, in order to placate you and keep you from queuing up for the battle of the last day's harvest. And that is the end of that article. And I've gone over an hour, so I will end this episode with this article. The Antichrist is not a person. And thank you for listening. There will be more to come. I have at least 20 more articles or so lined up for future consideration. Thank you for listening. Be blessed.